All right, great. So we've got our shoes in there. They're all nice and polished up. At this stage, I'm going to work on that next step of integration. And the first step within that I'm going to do is a little bit more liquefying and tweaking to the shape of the shoes. Now, the nice thing is we've got all that work that we did embedded in those smart objects. So now I can tweak those smart objects using Liquify without dealing with all that information that's inside them, all those layers. And I can just deal with them as almost brand new shapes. So check this out. I'll show you how to liquefy these guys just a little bit more. I'm going to go to the first one, which is the front shoe. Command-Shift-X. Bring it into Liquify. And I'm going to load my base file in front as my overlay. Now cruise in to a closer view and see how these shoes compare. You can go back and forth. Now I might want to tuck in a little bit around the top of the toe here. In the area just below the tongue, or where the tongue meets the laces, I think could come up just a bit. Just so I align it to the anatomy of his foot a little bit better. The closer I get to that, the better it's going to look. Yeah, the heel area looks like it aligns pretty good. The entry point to the shoe lines up with the back of his ankle pretty good. Let's move down the shoe to where the sole meets the ground. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to completely align the sole of the shoe you're comping in to the shoe that exists in the space, you might be able to pull off using the shadow that's already in the space. And if you can do that, that could be a big step forward because you don't have to recreate shadows yourself. I'm not saying we're definitely going to be able to do that in that case here, but I always like trying to get as close as I can because when you're able to pull that off, it's a huge time saver. Now that said, I don't want to sacrifice any of the authentic shape of the shoe in order to make that happen because there are things we can do later to be able to make the existing shadow fit a little bit better, maybe be able to pull that off. Just going to tuck the toe in a bit. So now I'll take one last look at this shoe without using the overlay. You can just turn that off. See if there are any overall improvements I can make to streamline this. Right here it pokes out just a little bit. Just going to make that a little bit of a straighter line. All right, that's a good looking shoe. Let's go back and forth and see the improvements that we made to that. I think it looks a lot better. Let's move on to the back shoe, Control-Shift-X. Load the base file, And I think in this one there's going to be a little bit more tweaking to do because the angle was a little bit different. Didn't exactly align. Let's tuck that up just a bit. Let's do one more beauty shape pass, see if we can improve anything. And that looks like a pretty nice shape to me. I'm good. Commit. A little bit of an adjustment to the ridge up here because his is at quite an angle up, so align that a little bit more. So these shoes are looking pretty good now. I'm just gonna quit messing around with them at this stage and move on to the athlete. So we need to start from step one with him, just like we would the shoe. So we need to go in and do some beauty shaping, that first pass liquefy on him and see if there's anything we can improve to the overall shape. Let's go into liquefy. All right, I'm ready to start shaping on the athlete, but it's important to note here, when we're shaping on a shoe and manipulating its form, it's one thing, but once we start dealing with people, it's completely a different one. And it's a very important subject for you, me, as the commercial retoucher, to be able to have a sort of code of ethics and a guiding principle when you start dealing with bodies. It's a very important topic for us and for our clients because it doesn't serve anybody to manipulate bodies in a way that actually looks unrealistic or maybe creates unrealistic expectations or manipulates the body in a way that doesn't respect the authenticity of the photograph and the individual. That's important for everybody, because our clients want images that not only reflect aspirational figures and personalities, but also things that are real and authentic subjects. Because right now in visual culture, popular culture, people are very, very visually intelligent. They know when they're looking at an image that's not authentic. So it's very important for you to respect that, know what the boundaries are, and have your own angle on how to preserve those important qualities in your images. First thing I start to look at is the apparel and see if there are just any lines that I can straighten out. If nothing else, you can just start straightening some lines up and you'll improve that level of communication with your viewer. So why are we straightening up lines in the apparel? It's basically just to improve the visual read of the apparel, the visual quality of it. The quality of shape is going to improve flow, improve its contours, and improve the perceived value that the product has. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on in the shorts that can get cleaned up, but the main thing that I'm looking for in Liquify is what can I straighten out? And this seam right here seems like that could get a little bit straighter to me. Great, now moving on to the tights, I'm going to try to minimize some of the folds. Now, I know from experience that later I'm going to be fixing a lot of these folds with frequency separation. But right now I'm just looking for the more structural folds where they meet edges and trying to straighten those a bit. Now, once again, I've been going into looking at micro changes. I'm going to step back and look a little more from a macro level, see if there are any bigger improvements that I can make in the overall shape of this guy. I'm going to take a little bit of license and just push out that little irregularity in the silhouette. And the back overall seems just a touch straight to me, so this is really just a compositional decision. I just want a little bit more variation in the line of the back. that can just explain a little bit more of the anatomy as it meets here. That's more of an interesting line to me now. And in terms of shapes, do you feel like that could just take a little bit of a tuck in to be a slightly less distracting? Be able to clean up this line just a touch. Well, we know we don't have to worry about the shoes. Any improvements on the hands? Feels like those knuckles could be tucked in just a bit. Now, it's a funny almost contradiction because the photograph is authentic. It's always going to capture what's right there. But at the same time, photographs, especially when you start looking at anatomy and people, they tell kind of strange stories about individual parts of the body. Once you start really focusing in on that with the eye of someone who takes images apart, you start to notice these things that just happen within camera where parts of anatomy sort of look strange and distorted. So it's these decisions that we have to make about telling a more concise story about the body without manipulating it too far. So one thing you might have noticed is that I'm really not doing anything to clean up this edge up here. Now I could streamline that, but it's really not necessary to clean that up. And there are a couple other places maybe. That seems to be the most sort of non-uniform area. But I know I'm going to cut this image out. So I know I don't have to go in and really trim that edge. Same thing goes on the back of the leg here. I can minimize all of these folds because I know when I get to that stage, I can trim in to the leg and basically just trim those off. Let's review those changes. Now, like I said, just incremental changes to the image is all we're looking for. All those add up to this big change at the end. I feel like we made a few subtle improvements and I'm ready to move on to the stage of isolating the athlete. So just like the products, I'm going to move into the athlete in the same way and do a complete silo clip out. Now, you'll notice on this, I set it up for a 2-pass clip job. And that's really because there are so many long curves, long smooth curves in this figure. And I find that the best way to make the most elegant curve with the fewest points really quickly is to use 2-pass method. Now, if you're a really experienced clipping artist, you might be able to do those using the traditional method, and I don't want to dissuade you from doing that. But if you want to get really accurate results really quickly, you can use the 2-pass method. What I really like about the 2-pass method is it allows me to really just create a curve that's essential. And by that, I mean I'm not getting hung up on individual points. You see how I already started trimming off some of the areas here, because 2-pass clipping really allows me to step back from my image a bit. And even though I'm zoomed in pretty close, I know that I'm going to add as few points as possible. If I'm doing this in the traditional method, it's easy to really lose that bird's eye view and go in too close and not clean up the image as you go. 2-pass clipping really allows you to simplify a lot easier. Now I'm seeing a ton of chromatic aberration that I didn't notice right off the bat in here because I wasn't really looking closely for it. Just because you're clipping doesn't mean you can't stop what you're doing. Go back to your smart object. And enable remove chromatic aberration to get that purple stuff to get out of there. Now let's get back into the silo path. Notice what I'm doing when I come to hair. I don't want to worry about hair at all right now. I'm just going to clip well inside the edges of the hair. Once again, you're going to notice this theme. I'm making the line that I want right now, not the line that's in the image. Notice I'm just cruising right through this hair here and clipping inside of it. This is, once again, the theme. I don't want to deal with a whole lot of things at once. I want to compartmentalize, and I know from experience that the process of dealing with hair edges is going to be separate from clipping. So I'm going to deal with that later. I don't even want to think about it right now. Just clip inside of it. This is another way that 2Pass really shines, is as you get details like this, it's really easy to just add points and create little bumps that go and outline an edge of something like this that has a sort of regular detail along the edge. Now, you might be wondering why I'm clipping the shoes out as part of this overall silo clip. Now, that's because I know eventually that I want this athlete, even though the shoes are separate, I want him to be one continuous image contained within one mask. And part of doing that is prepping this in a way that I don't need to keep the athlete separate and the shoes as separate elements. So that point that I just made about the shoes being part of this full silo mask, it's also worth noting that this is another one of those commitment points. And you need to think in terms of that, because even though this process is completely non-destructive and pretty dynamic, there are a lot of steps that you have to commit to what you've done. This stage, I've committed to the shape, the outside shape of those shoes, and that they match perfectly. Because if I need to change that, I'm going to have to clip out and redo this silo mask again. So be sure you're in the place that you really like the shape of those shoes before you go ahead and do this. Once again, notice that that lace, I don't like how big that is, so I'm just going to trim it off. Notice here, I didn't agonize over creating detail along the edge here because I know that's sort of like a corrugated edge because of that texture on the sole. But since this shoe is back a little bit and it's kind of soft, I'm not going to mess with that right now. I'm just going to let that go. If I need to add a little bit of detail along that edge, I'm going to do it later. All right, we're back to where we started. You might be asking yourself as I'm going along here, how am I making these decisions about what to clip off, what to trim off, where to put the line? And I think the guiding principle here is two-pass clipping really helps you simplify your entire process. And when you're choosing out how to show edge detail, the name of the game is basically simplify. I want to show that there is some edge detail, but I want to simplify all of that down to create a much more streamlined read of the outline of the image. So the only thing left to do is to get the gaps between the legs, and I think there's some on the arm and just below the torso. So I can't really see what's going on here, so I'm going to go back in and back shoe. I'm going to reduce the opacity on that so I can see what's going on. Go back to my pen tool, make sure I'm still on the silo, and I'm just going to use a one pass to do this. It's easy enough. All right, so our silo clip is completely done for this athlete. This may be very different than how you're used to working. It probably is if you're coming from a workflow that deals with a continuous image that is never deconstructed. So there's nothing wrong with working in that way. But what you're going to see from doing these steps, and you can think back to the shoe that we initially did that we put on a new background, the flexibility and power that isolating these elements in this way affords us later down the road, especially when we need to make client changes, is huge. And you saw how loose I could be with my silo clip and actually how that's a part of cleanup. Now, if I was going to keep this guy in this background and try to manipulate him while he's still baked into that background, while that's a single continuous image, I wouldn't be able to do such a fast silo clip. I'd have to be a lot more careful. In this way, I get to move quickly, streamline the shape, and have ultimate flexibility and control over my image at the end.